So Angela and Travis, it's fantastic to meet both of you. I was just talking in the green room to Angela while we wait for Travis to join us. Angela and Travis are Oregon and Idaho. So I established that Angela was the one that was in Oregon and Travis is in Idaho, and you're slightly different time zones. So really good to meet both of you. Tell me a little bit about your business and how you ended up in business together.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I'll get started and just share that Travis and I are cousins. So we share a set of grandparents. So that's how we came to know each other, obviously. But we both have been in marketing for quite some time. And I had my own copywriting business some years ago. And Travis has also had his own business that he was running. And we decided that we wanted to get into business together and figure out that what we could do. We specialize in working for biotech and AgTech companies.
And AgTech is agriculture. Is that right? Agricultural technology. So yeah. So when I was reading your bios, I mean, it sort of looked like you technically were sort of microbiologists and farmers, right? I mean, that's kind of how it read to me in insofar as the bios, but I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah,
just a bit.
So obviously in agricultural technology and biotech, I mean, it's clearly a kind of fast moving industry. So I'm guessing you guys need to kind of really be on your toes as far as the clients that you work with. How does a kind of typical engagement work for you?
I'll let Travis start with this one since I took the last one.
Yeah, you bet. So you're right. It's definitely fast moving, yet at the same time, things seem to be very slow. Like decisions still take time depending on the process you're going through. So typically the clients that especially on the ag tech side. So my background is the farming. Grew up on a farm in Colorado and eventually kind of evolved into the marketing space over a long career. But yeah, typically engaging with the client, we really like to bring them in and really understand the strategy first. Like that's especially what I'm most passionate about. I've spent a good chunk of time working on the kind of the nitty gritty tactics in my life and seeing what works, what doesn't work. And I wanted to bring that agricultural background into the tech space and into the really help them move into it. So what we typically will do is come in and really do a kind of a deep dive of where the company has been so far, what type of collateral that they're using, the channels that they've been on. Do they have any reporting? Do they understand why they're doing what they do? I think the biggest issue I see happening is that people will have they'll do something because they saw it on another channel. They saw someone on LinkedIn or they saw someone doing pay-per-click, like, oh, we have to do that too. But there's never a reason behind it, right? So they don't know what does a good performing ad look like? Are they writing copy for LinkedIn or doing videos for LinkedIn that really engage their buyer? Or is it just to put content out? One of my favorite clients is a trailer manufacturing company, like an ag trailer manufacturing company. And they really went all in on like the visual of the trailer. Has nothing to do with the specs, why they're doing it. It's about that visual appeal. And that's their LinkedIn strategy. And it's worked out great. You wouldn't just do that because you saw something online, right? Like there was a reason behind it. They knew that, I mean, buying an agricultural trailer can be really spec heavy. You want to have weights, you want to have strength and the type of material and the way it flexes back and forth. That's hard to put into a LinkedIn post, but just showing it out in the field and driving and bouncing around, that's where you get some pretty amazing shots.
Yeah, it's funny. I've got a friend who he lives in Starkville, Mississippi, and him and his brother, they own a kind of a gun dog supply store, right? So they basically sell equipment for people that go out sort of hunting and people that have gun dogs. And what they've done, I mean, he's become a very, very proficient drone pilot. He's become a very proficient photographer, because what he does is he basically follows his brother around. His brother's become like the kind of the face of the brand, right? He does all the sort of videos where they'll take pieces of equipment out into the field and show the usage of that equipment out in the field. And I think for people that are in market for that, it really sort of resonates with them, because that's the sort of thing that they're looking for. It's like, well, what does it actually look like from a practical perspective?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I follow another guy on LinkedIn, especially that focuses on the ag side, and the way that drone photography has evolved is incredible. Like back when I started, like you're out there in the fields with an old fashioned camera, and then you're having to go back to the film and develop it and all that. Today it's instantly, and they can set up AI to edit the program on the fly, and so the time from the drone taking that shot and the zooming in and the panning and capturing all that really like what you wouldn't have thought of as really kind of sexy looks. I mean, it's amazing, and it's getting to market a lot faster with those ads, which is, I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen businesses that use camera to cloud. So basically, the cameras are out there, and as soon as they've finished recording video or taking pictures, they're uploaded to the cloud, so the editing team can start working on them straight away. They don't even need to get back to the office to kind of like do anything. It's like it does it all sort of automatically. So again, I'm always amazed at the evolution of technology. I mean, I look at sort of when I started out in the industry and the tech that we had at that point to in terms of where we are now. I mean, it's changed dramatically. What are the big changes that you've seen in sort of AgTech and biotech in that time?
I'll take this one. There have been a lot of changes that I've seen just in my career, and that's one of the things that gets me really excited about the work that I do. And so I focus a lot more on the biotech side, and kind of by default, we're doing a lot of technical work. We're focusing on what is new and most innovative, and what is going to help us get an edge for that next thing. And there's been a lot of changes. I think one of the biggest changes that we've seen in recent years is the big growth of AI, and especially what you can do with it. It's fascinating the things you can do, starting with ChatGPT. We've come a long ways just even since then, and that's only been a few years. The things that you can do with your marketing strategies, with how you can pull in different AI capabilities, there's just so much that you can see. And I know Travis has actually experimented with it in ways that even I haven't at this point. So I've been learning even more from him, which is great. Travis, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about some of the AI tools that you've seen.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, like you said, there has been so much change in the AI field and over the years, just in technology alone. So what used to take us forever, we can automate really quickly now. One of the things I really have found useful is the agentic side of it, right? And what I've found from an AI perspective is that it's so easy to get distracted by the newest thing and the latest challenge and all of that. I try and stick to some of the core pieces, right? So like you said, ChatGPT is really powerful for building out, whether it's simple code or testing out the different platforms. You can create A/B tests, and then you take it into an automation solution like make.com, or I don't spend the money for the operational side of ChatGPT, right? It's not $200 a month is not worth it to me, especially when some of the other ones. But yeah, you can automate your workflows. You can tell it to go out and pull resources. For kicks and giggles, I did one that I just built a tool that analyzes. I'm a big fan of supercross racing, motorcycle racing, and it goes in and analyzes the last events all on its own, and then comes and pulls that back into and does like a prediction of where the your racers will finish on that next Saturday day. And it's just been really interesting to see how you can play with that. Did another campaign where we set up an email that it would monitor the individual's email box when a certain subject line came in. AI agents would go out and research that person's company. They would pull from ChatGPT to draft a bio of what that's going to look like, and then send it back to me. And I can look at that and say, hey, here's some information to prepare for the sale, what that person needs when they're talking on their next call. And it's just, you're able to do that so much more quickly and at a fraction of the cost. You don't have to have the researcher on your team anymore. You don't have to spend as much money on some of these research platforms. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, I remember whenever you'd go into a meeting, you would say, right, your job is to take the minutes, right? And then the person would have to collect the minutes and then transcribe everything and send them out to people and everything else. Whereas again, you look at AI now, I mean, in most cases, I think Google Meet have just pushed out the capability for transcriptions and meeting notes, right? So basically you have a meeting, you don't need to worry about anyone taking the notes. It'll give you a title for the meeting, who's in attendance. give you a summary, action points, all that sort of stuff, send it out to the attendees, and then the transcription will also go out as well, right? So that gives you the ability to again, I'm using like Notion heavily in my business to try and sort of do the collation of things, particularly around the podcast. I mean, I've had a reasonable number of podcast guests so far, but it's only going to grow. And what I want to be able to do is to go and interrogate the information to pull out the points within the individual episodes. So each episode might be between sort of 30 and 30 minutes and an hour, right? I want to be able to say, well, I can't remember really. I mean, I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. So I can't imagine what I'm going to be thinking about episode 2 and what we discussed. So I can kind of get the transcription from the YouTube video that's uploaded, get it into Google Drive. That then becomes something I can go and interrogate it and say, show me all the podcast episodes where we talked about AI or where we talked about Google ads or whatever it might be. And it will give me all of the kind of context of where it was, which episodes, where it was in the transcript. So I can go straight to that point and kind of pick up where I go. What I can then do is obviously summarize that and potentially turn that into a blog post, right? But I'm using the automation aspect of it. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Make. I mean, I played around with Make for quite a while. At the moment, I'm playing around a lot with NA10. That's another one which is really kind of cool, and it's given me the great capability. Again, with when you upload a video, and I want to be able to go, right, I want to be able to get a transcript. I want to be able to get the title, the description, the ID, the link, so I can kind of, instead of having to go to YouTube and go to Studio and then find the video and click it, I can just click on it and do it that way, right? So for me, I just think I think AI for good is fantastic, right? But I think equally, there's also sort of situations where I mean, there's a big AI summit going on at the moment, or I don't know if it's just finished, but I think the problem I see with AI is all of these individual countries are going to want to control it themselves, right? And there's always this challenge of, well, who's governing this, right? I mean, DeepSeek came out,
Right.
everyone was up in arms about that, right? And you go, well, okay, if it had been any other country but China, they'd have gone, good on you, well done, that's fantastic. But because it's China, they just assume that there's a nefarious kind of underpinning deep state kind of reason why they're doing it, rather than it's just they've got good tech, they've got good people, and they've kind of worked out a better way of doing it than everyone else has, right? So,
Right.
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I
I
think
mean,
that AI
go
can
ahead.
absolutely be used for good and it can be used for bad. And I think there's been a lot of discussion in recent years about who controls it and why and what sort of laws are going to be around it. And we simply just don't know right now. The technology is still so new and it's growing faster than we can even keep up with it at this point. So I think it's one of those things that we'll have to make a decision about. And I've been seeing companies make a decision about, yes, we're definitely using this, or no, we're definitely not using that, or we're only going to use this, but we're not going to use that. So I think right now, what I'm seeing is that companies and individuals are making those choices for themselves about what they think is going to be best for their corporate strategy, what is best for their employees, and what is best for their security as well. Those are all considerations. And right now, we don't know what we don't know. And I think that at some point, yes, governance will catch up to the technology. Maybe at some point. Right now, it's going so fast that it's hard to keep up with. And we'll have to contend with that at some point too. We'll have to adapt to whatever those new laws are or those new rules are. And we're still figuring a lot of that out. I do think it's good that that will happen at some point. What exactly that's going to look like and on what timeline, I'm still not sure. I think there's still so much of that remains to be decided, and we're just not sure on what that future looks like. But at some point, yes, I do expect that to happen, and I think it will be a good thing. It's just yet one of those other things that we'll have to adapt to.
Yeah, and I think that goes back on the marketing side, especially, but the strategy behind why you're doing it. It's not just, you don't want to just have AI because you have AI and you can push that messaging out. It's more about understanding how you intend to use it as a marketing department, as a company itself, and then to the point of good or bad for it, like what risks are you willing to take? And you have to have checks and balances in place. We had someone a while back that was writing a blog post, changed things up using an AI tool and started to publish it like, well, let's double check. And the links were wrong. Like there was literally nothing in there. So that's something you have to be prepared for, from like understanding where it's going to go. You also have to be comfortable as a brand. Like, do you want to have your brand associated with AI content? Do you want to have it more human structured? I think I was reading an article the other day that said as more and more companies adopt AI into their marketing planning and their content creation, there's an opportunity for others to niche out and actually only use human generated materials. So it's going to be a little more expensive. It's going to take a little more time, but you'll be different. And that's what we all try and do in marketing, is just to be that little bit different than someone else.
I think we need
Right.
to get to the point where there's the transparency and disclosure, right? So I think, but for me, I don't have an issue with people using AI. Again, like you talked about agentic AI. Again, most people are looking for answers to questions, right? So again, if I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I have a burning question for a company, if I have to wait until 9 o'clock in the morning to be able to call up and do something, that's like not a good experience, right? Whereas if I could kind of go on to some sort of, whether it's a chatbot or whatever, and actually have a conversation with somebody that's kind of pulling their knowledge from a vast pool of information that business has, right? There's every likelihood that that particular answer will be accurate and relevant and satisfy me as the customer, right? It'll give me the answer that I'm looking for, right? And it saves them having to kind of employ people to sit there on a call center through the night, just in case somebody happens to do what I do and wake up at 2 a.m. to kind of ask a question.
Right. And that's one of those things too that can even be a strategic advantage. If you're taking advantage of opportunities like that really thoughtfully, really strategically, you can focus your headcount, your employees, and your strategies on things that are going to be more meaningful and in addition to what you're doing in your business, right? Things that are going to drive value for your business and help you grow. So it's one of those things that companies just have to decide, is this going to give us a strategic advantage? Is it worthwhile? Is it worth those risks? Because yes, there are some of those risks. And are we willing to invest in that? So it's something that every company has to decide. And they have to be very thoughtful about whether or not this fits into our strategy for marketing and for business growth and for anything else.
Yeah, I mean, like I've worked with a lot of businesses in lead generation, and I've always maintained, I mean, ultimately people say, yeah, I'm looking for leads, but they're not really looking for leads. They're looking for qualified leads and leads that turn into sales or inquiries or whatever it might be. And for me, I've always kind of said, well, I'd much rather work with people that will allow me to understand a little bit more about the sort of back end in terms of what specifically the kind of the criteria that makes it a good lead, right? So it's almost like I can do some pre-scoring of the people that are coming through call centers or what have you, right? I want to be able to ask questions of those people as they come in, so that at the point in time that it gets transferred across, I know that they've met the validation level, right? And you can kind of use lots of IVRs and things like that to get to that point. Press 1 for this, 2 for this, whatever it might be. But again, I think we're at the point now where the IVRs of ones and twos and threes are probably not the right way. You could probably use like an AI bot that would actually understand kind of what the questions are and how those responses are, and then that way you can kind of field it to the right people in the right way without having to kind of incur great expense of having people there asking the questions.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't had a chance to do it. I don't, and maybe you have. I'd be curious to know. But I've heard that there is, as we build these chatbots out, there is the opportunity to look at keywords that they're referencing in the chat that the customer is referencing and score the individual based off that, all using an AI platform, so that when you wake up in the morning, you've got this person that's pre-qualified based off of an AI conversation. Have you had a chance to do that in the lead gen side?
I mean, in some cases we have. I think one of the challenges is that in some of the verticals that we've generated leads in, there's this kind of the regulation that kind of applies to it just really doesn't really make that viable as a proposition, right? So again, we kind of work with sort of at-risk credit cards. So credit cards for people with adverse credit, and we kind of said, well, when we process the applications, we capture the information from people as they come in. We can see the applications that ultimately get, validated and approved by the company that we were selling the leads to. And we could see the ones that were being declined, and we could kind of work out based on that. We could work out based on our data what the underwriting criteria for eligibility was, right? But when we said to them, can you tell us what your eligibility, your underwriting is? And no, we can't tell you. We can't tell you that. That's proprietary and it's confidential and so on and so on. It's like, well, in that case, we're just going to continue to send you leads that aren't going to be good enough, right? We would know that they're going to be declined, but because you won't tell us what the underwriting criteria is, we'll just carry on sending them, right? And ultimately, that credit card company, I mean, every single lead that they were processing by a person, right, was costing them something like $25 to $30 to process every application, regardless of whether it was an immediate like no, right? So things like people that were under the age of 25 or something like that, living at home with no credit history, 100% were going to be declined, right? So it's kind of, we could see that, but we couldn't actually build that into our sort of capture information. So we needed them to we still needed to send them the leads, even though we knew the outcome was going to be like a no.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, as you talk through that, it would be so easy for them to adopt some sort of an AI that would scan maybe initially those applications and quickly acknowledge, hey, this is good, this one's not as good, or this one maybe take a human look into it and save. I mean, just think about that. If they processed, I mean, I don't know how many applications they got in a day. Let's just say 100 a day. If they were able to do half of those with human instead of having to do all of them, they would have saved a whole lot of money. And then you multiply that times every day of the year. I mean, that's an incredible amount of expense. And the AI platforms now, yes, there is risk and there is the anxiety of what happens with that data. But most of the companies anymore are providing some sort of security notice ahead of time. They're saying, hey, we know that you're a little anxious. Trust us. We'll back it up with our bond. And I mean, save companies thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. I mean, I remember like back in probably, I want to say it was like the year 2000, right? So at the time I was selling websites and I would go and see sort of various websites. And I remember going to see this dentist and they had a dental practice. And I said, so what's your process for kind of getting people to come and see you for regular checkups? And they said that they would send out like letters with stamps. So they kind of write a letter out, put a stamp on it, go down to the post office, put it in the post box to send these letters out. And I basically said, look, you can kind of set up a CRM. When people come in, they register on your system. As soon as they kind of come in to see you, you go, have you got an email address? Give us your email address. And then we can send automatically, we could send them a checkup reminder every 6 months. It's six months. And we said, and it would reduce the number of people that you would need to kind of do it. And it would also save you a ton of money in postage, right? I mean, the amount of money that they were spending on stamps was crazy, right? And we were obviously trying to sell them a website solution with this CRM and everything else. And they just, for some reason, they just couldn't see it. But you look at it now and you think, and that was 25 years ago. And you look, even today, there are still companies that are still doing things in such an old school way. I mean, you're working in AgTech and BioTech, and that must be so much further advanced in some respects, but probably still deeply rooted in old school ways of doing things. I mean, is that a kind of accurate assessment?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it's really funny that even working in tech fields, that you still find these really old systems or that we're so rooted in these old ways of doing things. And that's just what we continue to do. And I think part of that is culture. And sometimes it's easier to just do what you have known to work in the past and adapt to something else, right? So, and there does have to be a balance with that. You don't have to necessarily get rid of an old system if it's working well. For instance, maybe those letters are way more effective. Maybe they're much better at getting people to return to the office and to remember that, oh, yeah, I do have a dentist appointment or I need to make a dentist appointment. So there's a little bit of that too. And that's the case too in the biotech space, is that we have some old ways of doing things that are still working well. We can adapt some of those ways to some degree, incorporate some new technology where it makes sense. Just a really simple example is I used to work day in and day out in a lab, and plating microbiological samples is one of those things that you do on a day-to-day basis. And that is sometimes still the best way to get the results you're looking for. Now, there are ways to automate that. There are ways to incorporate new machines and new technology that can make that faster. Those are sometimes just as good, sometimes not. So sometimes you'll still use those old methods alongside a new method and compare them side by side. Sometimes you can go away from the old methods entirely and just use a new method. And that's something that I've seen in the biotech space is that, yes, we do adapt new technologies pretty readily for the most part, but we also have to make sure that we're validating those methods, and that takes time. And being in the world of science, it's very, very important to be able to validate the work that you're doing, because if you can't, then you can't trust the work that you're doing. So that's something that is really important to be able to do. Biotech, while yes, we adapt new technologies pretty readily, we're also very cautious. So it has to go both ways. You have to have enough of that old that you know is working well, but be flexible enough to adapt to the new when it's going to help you work more efficiently.
Yeah. The ag tech space is definitely the same. The challenge that the providers have is that you develop a let me say that this when I started out in farming, we were driving the tractors like hand on the wheel, watching the crease below and making sure that you weren't going over crops. Today, there's technology that's telling me how much grain is being planted, how deep it is. I can adjust it all with these computers and dials. The individuals that are having to do that are producing that equipment and producing that software are trying to sell it to family farms that have done it the same way for generations. While at the same time, they're trying to make sure that they have it as prepared as possible for these kind of corporate farms where there's just going to be workers coming in and out. They may not have a whole lot of experience. So like trying to make sure that your technology adapts for each one of those is really challenging, and trying to communicate a different message to each one of those about the benefits to the family farm versus the mega farm is going to be completely different.
I think
And the adoption is going to be different too. But
and is it a generational thing? Do you think eventually the generations, the older generation that may be kind of like, well, we've always done it this way, they'll kind of pass on, and kind of the younger people that inherit the kind of family farm will kind of like bring it into the 21st century in some respects, or is it kind of like, is that not what the sort of barrier is?
that's a good question. I think that it's going to be a little bit of both. This goes into more of the philosophical side, but as farming costs increase, you're seeing fewer and fewer family farms being passed generation to generation. So the the institutional knowledge that comes from the older generation is not being passed down because they can't afford to keep the farm up, or there's just so much change. It's easier to pass it along. So I think that you'll have a generation that is willing to adopt it right away. There's new farmers coming in when they can, and they're starting small, and they're younger, they're in their 20s and 30s, and they're like, how can I make something different based off of the tech experience I have? So I think you'll have that. The corporate farms, absolutely, they're just going to be willing to adopt it because they're always on the lookout for a quicker and more efficient way to do it.
So your new president has obviously got a very different view on things like climate change than probably most other sort of world leaders, and again things like fossil fuels. Like, we're trying desperately to kind of like not have it, and he's like, well, we're just going to go and drill it and what have you. I mean, again, as an outsider looking into kind of what's going on in the States, I mean, to me, it's sort of like, I don't know if just generally speaking, the kind of concerns about climate change are, well, India's not doing it, China's not doing it, so we shouldn't bother doing it anyway, or should we kind of be more sort of watchful about what's going on kind of the rest of the world and try and lead by example?
We have to do something different. And I say this as, I think if I was a fourth generation farmer, our family came over from Germany back in the 1800s and started farming really early. The change that has happened from when I was first on a farm to what's going on today, it's undeniable that there's something going on. And it's clear if you follow the science of what's causing that, right? It is the fossil fuels. It is the pollution that was kicked out into in those checks and balances are very important. And there's a big risk for pulling those off. And I think that, I mean, I have to be careful on what I say because I don't want to just sound like I know it all. But I really do feel that if we don't make some sort of a focused effort to make sure we have improvements in place on the way that the fumes come out of your tractor. We used to laugh about, as a kid, we used to laugh about the studies being done on the methane gas produced by cattle farms. There's changes that you can make that actually do cause those improvements, right? The way that a exhaust plume came out from when I was a kid, and we had these old tractors from the 20s and 30s versus what they are today, it's completely different. The fuels are better. There's better filtration systems. From the animal side, there's new technologies that are improving the type of food that they have. We're this kind of plays into some of the biotech side too. Is like we're improving what is being fed to the animals. We're making it, less likely that there's going to be methane gas. The politicians don't see that. Like they're just voting what happens from the lobbyist, and like the farm lobbies are struggling to really communicate some of that change because they balance that, right? The old school farmer is going to say, this is the way I've always done it. Quit telling me how to run things. Whereas there's change that needs to happen, and that's being pushed by other individuals that are new into it. And
I mean, the politicians are going to go talk about the cost of a quart of milk, and it's gone up by a certain number of cents or dollars or whatever it might be. But as you say, like if the extra cost is because of things that have been done to kind of improve the environment, then that should really be applauded rather than punished, right? It's sort of like, to me, it seems like this, you're being punished for caring about the environment, and now people are going, well, let's just not bother about it. And for me, again, it's sort of like this. I think, as you say, the science is undeniable. I don't think the kind of the data can be anything other than it's valid, it's verified, it's impactful, and we need to do something like now, right? I mean, again, I've got
absolutely,
I've got kids, grandkids, and I'm thinking, I don't want them to kind of grow up in a world where things kind of go to pieces because we didn't pay heed to what was there all along, right? We had all the data and we just chose to ignore it. And for me, it scares me that that's what's happening.
It's such a short-term focus, right? Like we can't just look about what's happening today or tomorrow, but we need to be thinking about what happens a year, 5, 10 years from now. Because to your point, we're passing on something to these future generations, and we don't want to give them a overheated, unusable climate.
Yeah, you don't want to go, here's my house, here's my money. Oh, and I apologize for all the mess that has been left in the rest of the world as a result, right? So
speaking on the biotech side, we know what the science is telling us, and this is actually one of the reasons why I got into doing the work that I do, is that I started on the science side, and as a scientist, you learn what you're being told by the research. Research is not political, right? It's just posting something in a journal article that's been peer reviewed and is trusted, and is something that you can rely on. It's one of those things that's very frustrating for me as a scientist in my past life, a past professional life, to see how political it's become. It's very frustrating to see that. But it's something that I also recognized is a sort of a responsibility for myself. And that's to speak truly about what I'm seeing as a scientist that understands what is going on, to be able to help people communicate that. And that is one of the biggest struggles that I've seen in the world of biotech and science in general, is that it is so hard for scientists traditionally to communicate in ways that are clear and understandable and make sense. Because to be honest, science is so complicated. There's so much happening behind the scenes. It just doesn't always make sense unless you're really deep in the weeds and doing that work on a firsthand basis. So it can be a struggle to communicate that in a way that everyone can understand, and not to speak down about anyone's intelligence. But when you've done it so long, you understand the nature of what you're doing. You have to become so specialized in the work that you're doing that you really do become an expert, and to be able to speak to that in a way that everyone understands every pocket of science is like that. So if you just imagine that there's so many of these specialists, they're really, really good at what they do. It's hard to share that knowledge jointly and for everyone to understand that. And that is why one of the key reasons why I got into marketing is because I love the world of science and what it's doing. I truly believe it's making the world a better place, but it is so hard to communicate that. And that is something that I can help with. I can help explain that world. I can help share the struggles and the triumphs and the exciting things that are happening in that space and communicate that there are some really great things going on. And I think it is our responsibility to do that at least as much as we can. It's not easy, but it's so important.
Yeah, it's funny when you look at the states. I mean, there's 50 states, and you could almost say that there's environmental and societal issues, probably state by state. You could say, well, that happened there, that happened there, that happened there. You've got Hawaii. You had the the problems of fire in Hawaii, fire in California. You've got like floods in New Orleans, and you got floods in New York, and there's so many different sort of environmental and societal things that have happened. And I think so much of it is because I think a lot of states are inward looking. So they just, well, it's just like, if it doesn't impact us, it doesn't matter. Right. Whereas I think the countries that are outward looking, I mean, I think, yes, there's some, I guess, some religious and ethical kind of concerns around the whole, the Arab states. But again, if you look at what Saudi Arabia, UAE, I mean, what some of the things that they're doing in terms of technological advancements. And I think the reason that they're diversifying their portfolio is they all realize that the days of being just drilling for oil are probably not going to last forever, right? Eventually that should, in theory, stop, and they need to kind of have alternative sources of income to kind of make up for that, right? And that's why they're investing so heavily in some of these big infrastructure plans that they've got for cities that out in the middle of nowhere that you can go on a really high speed train to get to, and everything else. But again, I think they're looking at it longer term. They've got a much longer term view of things, rather than let's just look at what's happening just today. Because today, yeah, I mean, it matters, but it's like really, it can have a knock on effect to it's the first domino in a big sort of sequence of things that happen as a result of that. So,
yeah, and I'm not that old. I'm pushing 50, and in the last that small amount of time, what has changed is incredible, right? I mean, yes, technology, but from an environmental perspective, I mean, growing up where we had all this snow to where it's dry and not as heavy, and that impacts us very soon, right? Like we're to your point, the fires, the way that the floods are happening, like all this shifts. And what Ange was talking about is so, that's what makes me so passionate, is that I'm not a really good speaker. I can't get all of my thoughts out into a really good and crisp story until I start to like write it down. Ange is really good at taking the stories of the experiences that people have had and turning into something that's interesting, that it takes for kind of a smarty pants style, like the nerdy scientist language or the very research, like I can't understand that. But Ange takes that and puts it into such an interesting story, like, oh yeah, I'm suddenly passionate about why that's happening. I see how this modification in this fruit or the modification in this feed style actually is going to impact my life. And I feel a lot more personal than if I just read it in a scientific journal that I would not have understood in the first place.
Yeah, it's like again, here in the UK, there's so much more discussion now about the state of young people's, particularly, mental health, right? So yeah, I mean, we had the pandemic and all the schools shut, and people had to kind of do schooling from home and everything else. But but again, I think the fact that more and more people are aware of it. I mean, I keep thinking, what was it like when I was a child? Did we have mental health issues? And we probably did. We just didn't. It wasn't talked about. People just kind of got on with it, right? But I think the fact that it's being talked about now can only be a good thing. And I know that some of that is driven by social media. There's been loads and loads of young kids have taken their own lives, and the parents are blaming the social media companies rather than taking some responsibility themselves. But I don't know kind of who's to blame. I don't know whose job it is to enforce it or police it, right? Because I mean, it's a TikTok is a Chinese company, Chinese funded company. But, it's like, is it TikTok's fault that children have taken their lives, or is it some other environmental or societal thing that's kind of caused that to be the issue? And
I think it's all of that, right? I mean, as parents, we have a responsibility to give our kids the best resources and to make ourselves open and willing to talk about any sort of a challenge that they're going to have, so that they can feel comfortable talking to their parents and their peers about this, and not just going darker and darker on some sort of a social media channel. It's the responsibility of these companies to put checks and balances in place, so that there's not the promotion of darker and darker things that make that individual go just down such a terrible rabbit hole. And as marketing professionals, we have a ethical and moral responsibility to not be pushing content and material that feeds that darkness or that division. That, like, there's no need for it. There's so many good things that can be done if we would just focus on that instead. That makes it contributes to a better world. It contributes to better mental health. It makes companies' bottom lines are actually going to improve if they can show that they are doing something for the right reason, not just to pad bottom lines and send billionaires to space.
so the,
Yeah, I think that's important, and I think the key thing really is that we're talking about it, right? That's really where you have to start.
yeah,
You have to be open and honest about it, and you really can't do anything about it until you get to that point. So I do think, as a society, as a world society, that we are getting better about speaking about these challenges, and it's uncomfortable at times to do that. But that's the thing that gives me hope about the future, is I think we're a lot more open to talking about these things. And if you can start by talking about them, you can address them and be honest about the solutions. And there's no shame. Everyone has challenges. They look different for every single person. So I think it's really important to be able to speak openly about those things and help others understand that they're not alone in those struggles. So I do think it's good. But to Travis's point, that yes, we have a responsibility to make sure that we are being that light, that we're being positive and optimistic, at least as much as possible. We know that there are challenges in the world we live in, but we can also speak to the things that are going well and going right and promote more of those things as well. So it's an ongoing battle. It's something that we have to constantly revisit, but I do think it's on the responsibility of each of us, especially as marketers. It's important for us to be open and honest about the things that we're sharing about, and take an honest reflection on ourselves and those that we're supporting as well, to recognize that, okay, this is doing good or this is causing harm if it is.
yeah. So in terms of like the marketing of the stuff that the clients that you're working with, and the marketing campaigns that you sort of set up for them, what sort of challenges do you typically sort of come across when it comes to finding clients and trying to get stuff off the ground?
I think the most common pain point I run into is that people want to grow their businesses and they want to grow it yesterday. And they have this grand vision of what that looks like. And trying to be honest about the situation can sometimes be hard. And when it comes to marketing strategy, you just have to take an honest reflection to what Travis had mentioned earlier on in our discussion, is you have to look at where you're at right now, take stock of, okay, what is our current collateral? What are our current systems? Do we have our CRM up and running? What are we doing right now? And then make improvements to that. And marketing is one of those things that you have to test and experiment. So you have to have budget to be able to try different things to see what is working and tone back on the things that aren't working. So it takes time. It's a process. When you invest in your marketing strategy, you're probably not going to see overnight success. I mean, there's always a chance that you could go viral on social media, things like that happen.
So what
But
does success even
reproducing
look
that,
like? What would success look like? What, in terms of like, how do you define, or how do you sort of validate whether a particular initiative or campaign has kind of met the criteria? I mean, because again, I work primarily with e-commerce businesses where it's sales, and I work with B2B businesses where it's leads that we generate, and those are the kind of two easy to kind of measure validations that we have. But I would imagine in your line of work, it's so much more complicated.
it is, and it does depend on the business and what it's doing. And in the world of biotech, it really does vary. Sometimes it's leads, But what we try to do is before we start a marketing campaign is that we want to get really clear on what our metrics are and what we're paying attention to. Sometimes it is the number of leads we generated. Sometimes it's the awareness that we're getting. Sometimes it's the click-through rate we're getting on our email campaign. So it really does vary, and depending on what kind of tactics we're rolling in to our marketing strategy, those metrics will vary. But we do, before we start a campaign, get very clear on, okay, this is what we're aiming for. We know that this is an industry standard. We think that we can beat that industry standard by this much. And then when we run our marketing campaign, we check back on that performance and see how it's doing. And we figure out, okay, did it perform as well as we expected? Did it do better? Were there certain areas of it that didn't perform as well? And do we need to make some changes to that? So it really does vary considerably for biotech businesses. Biotech especially tends to be one of those industries that has a longer lead time. So you're not usually going to get someone to buy your system or your solution within the week. It's one of those things where you really do have to have multiple touch points before you get a sell at a certain point. So generally, you need to have a really well-developed marketing funnel where you're touching on different points throughout sometimes pretty long periods of time, but it does depend on the different biotech business and what we're selling.
And is it the same in AgTech, or is that kind of like completely different?
It is. It's a little bit different, but the concept is really the same. And it depends on the type of tech, right? Like if it's a machine that is helping the farmer guide their tractor or monitor the software that's monitoring the rate of plant germinations, et cetera. Like that's going to be a very expensive purchase, and it's going to be something that companies are going to be spending a lot of time researching. So you have to have your content, your KPIs that you're building. Like it might be you got 10 reviews of your blog or white paper that you just wrote, but those 10 are really, really good, solid individuals. So you have to decide, okay, how do I want to measure that? How long am I willing to see that cycle? That cycle can go anywhere from 3 months to, I think the longest that I've seen so far is about an 18-month purchase cycle, depending on how you're selling, what the price of it is. So you have to set those in advance and make sure that you're comfortable with that.
And is it your job to kind of manage the expectations of your clients in terms and make sure that they're realistic? Because again, I think if they go, hey, I want to have like 500 leads a week, it's sort of like, well, the size of your universe is probably not that big, so let's kind of be a little bit more realistic about it.
I can get you 500 leads a week, but they might be completely irrelevant to anything you want to do. So that's it. You have to go in with a clear mindset. And honestly, there are companies that I won't work with simply because their expectations are so unrealistic that I know I will never be able to make them happy, and it's not worth my stress, and I don't want to give them false hope. So there's definitely from our side, the marketing of our agency, like that's definitely something we have to think about too, is like, can we really work with them to set expectations in advance that are going to be achievable? And I think that for the most part, people are willing to listen. Angela and I have enough background now that we've seen and experienced some of the problems that can go on if you don't have realistic expectations. And I've driven some of those unrealistic expectations before. So I know what to expect. I know how to talk through those challenges and go from there.
And I would agree with that too, is that I've in the past, yes, I've made those mistakes where I wasn't clear with the client that, hey, this is what I think we can do. This is what is possible. And our goals are aligned and I can meet your needs. So I've learned some of those lessons the hard way. But I think those lessons have also informed me and been a good part of my educational journey to help me understand these are the kind of clients that I can serve. These are the kind of clients I want to work with. And these are the ones where I feel like I can really push the needle for. And I think it's really important to be clear on that. And all that to say is that, yeah, we don't work with anyone and everyone. We only work with people that we feel like we can truly make a difference to and who we can have an impact on their businesses. And that's really important to us too. We want to have that impact. We want to invest our time, resources, and energy on the businesses that we feel as though will benefit from our services. So we are selective about who we work with because we are mindful that we want to have this kind of impact and we want to help people that we know are going to be able to not only align with our goals, but also are going to be able to achieve potentially beyond what we set out for ourselves as well.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the biggest mistakes I see new agency owners make is they kind of go chasing the money, and eventually, I'm guessing most of them eventually work out the mistakes of that, like we all have, and realize that it's much better to kind of like vibe with. Again, I always say I want to work with clients I get on really really well with, right? Like they're I don't consider them to be clients. I consider them to be friends. I know their partners, their families. I kind of really go deep into the relationship side of things. And for that, I want to make sure that whatever it is that they're involved with, whether it's B2B or B2C, that the ethics of the business kind of align with my own beliefs, right? I don't want to be selling things that I know are going to be nefarious and not really sort of received that well, right? I saw that Shopify took Kanye West or Ye or whatever his name is. They took his site down, his store down because he was selling t-shirts with swastikas on, right? And it's like, well, why did it even take so much outcry for that to be a thing? I mean, like, don't just take some money just for the sake of it. I mean, that to me
Right.
was so much a much easier decision for them to make than it seemed to be at the time, right? But I guess it was the pressure from outside people that eventually they had some sort of checks in place to say, well, this is not the sort of thing that we would be cool having people selling on our platform.
Yeah. And the challenges, I mean, to your point, it's that outcry, but it shouldn't have to come to that because there is still companies selling through Shopify. They have some pretty hateful things on those sites. And it's unfortunate, but it is, I mean, this goes back to the philosophy a little bit, but it's our responsibility to call that out when we see it and not support it and encourage those companies to change their thinking a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. But it all starts with like just you can kind of, people say, well, I can't influence too much, but I really think you can. I mean, I think if you have a strong belief system, you can achieve a lot by doing it. I mean, again, that's part of the reason I podcast is kind of, I want to try and help bring more marketing people's brains to the table, right? To enable us to kind of educate and train and help the next generation of marketers, right? So that when we decide to kind of move on and sit on the porch in a rocking chair, we know that we've kind of left what's left of the industry in decent shape to kind of move forward with, right? So,
Right.
and so much of it is like, we'll all learn from mistakes that other people have made. I mean, I learned from mistakes that my old bosses made, and they told me, well, don't do this, don't do this. And you go, great, I'll learn from that and won't make those mistakes. But I think, yeah, but it's sometimes, like I said, it's a bit of a challenge to do that. But this has been phenomenal. I've really enjoyed the conversation. At some point in time, I'd love to kind of revisit this and see what progresses in terms of the technology side of things, any new stuff that's come out. But yeah, it just remains me to say thank you so much for being a fantastic guest. I've loved having you on.
Thank you for having us. It's been great to chat with you. It's been a lot of fun and absolutely happy to revisit these conversations later on.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for your time too.